It was supposed to be just another hearing. Routine. Predictable. A Thursday morning in D.C. where the microphones were hot, the cameras were fixed, and the chairs were already creaking under the weight of ego. The topic? Law enforcement funding. But the real noise wasn't on the agenda. It was in the way some people came into the room, not to listen, but to perform. And when Marjorie Taylor Greene showed up in her bright red blazer and that smirk that always smells like entitlement, everyone knew it was just a matter of time. She didn't wait for facts. She didn't wait for Jasmine to finish speaking. She just leaned forward, tapped her mic, and fired a shot laced in venom and performance. She's not even here to legislate. She's just a decorative prop, a left-wing mascot in lashes. No one gasped. Some smirked. And Jasmine? She didn't blink. She just reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not a rebuttal, not a speech, but a letter, written in pencil, by a 13-year-old black girl in Arkansas. In that moment, it changed everything. Before we get too deep, tap like and subscribe if stories like this keep you up thinking. And if you're watching right now, drop your state and the time you're tuning in. We want to know who's still awake with us. Dim the lights. Turn down the world. This is where the silence breaks. The hearing chamber felt more like a stage than a space for justice. Fluorescent lights buzzed above like they were tired of pretending this was neutral ground. The seal of the United States Congress loomed behind the chairperson's head like a reminder. This is power. Behave accordingly. And in the center row, surrounded by suited aides and photographers on standby, sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, steady, unreadable, flipping through her briefing folder like someone flipping through strategy itself. She hadn't spoken yet, but across the room someone else had already decided her silence was an opportunity. Marjorie Taylor Greene leaned back in her chair, red blazer sharp, mega pin gleaming under the lights, lips curled like a question mark made of contempt. She'd been waiting, not to contribute, but to strike. The chair gavelled in. This hearing will come to order. We are here today to discuss federal funding allocations for law enforcement agencies across state lines. It was standard language, until it wasn't. Just as Jasmine reached for her microphone to begin her opening questions, Marjorie interrupted, without procedural cause, without even a flicker of restraint. Her voice cut through the chamber like a knife masked in a smile. Mr. Chairman, before the Congresswoman from Texas continues, I just want to clarify something for the record. She didn't wait for permission. She's not even here to legislate. She's just a decorative prop, a left-wing mascot in lashes, propped up for viral moments and Instagram claps. There it was, the hit, blatant, disrespectful, calculated. A few heads turned. One aide flinched. A couple of Republican members smirked like they'd just watched their favorite player score. Jasmine didn't respond. Not with words, not with a scoff, not even with a glance. She turned a page. Marjorie leaned in further, louder now. I'm just saying, we're here to legislate, not to live stream feelings. Maybe the Congresswoman would like to trade her seat for a ring light? There were no objections. Not yet. The chair, visibly uneasy, tapped the gavel once, soft and awkward. Let's stay focused on the topic, please. But the damage was done. Somewhere in the back row, a reporter raised her phone just slightly higher. On Twitter, someone had already clipped the moment. Prop. Mascot. Ring light. Words meant to diminish. Words meant to dehumanize. And still, Jasmine said nothing. Instead, she slowly reached into her bag, drew out a single folded sheet of paper, and laid it flat on the desk. It wasn't her notes. It was handwritten, on lined paper, with a small, shaky signature at the bottom. And then, for the first time, she spoke, not to respond, not to clap back, but to redirect the entire room's attention. Mr. Chairman, before I proceed with my questions, I'd like to read a letter. It's from a 13-year-old girl in Little Rock, Arkansas. The room stilled. Jasmine opened the letter. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It landed like truth dropped into water, soft but unstoppable. Dear Congresswoman Jasmine, my name is Amara. I go to a middle school where my teacher told me I asked too many questions and I should stop being too much. But then my mom showed me a video of you. A murmur, a shift. Even the aides stopped their typing. You didn't shout. You didn't cry. You just stood there while they tried to shrink you. And you didn't shrink. That's when I knew. I didn't have to either. Silence followed, not out of awkwardness, but out of reverence. Even Marjorie lowered her eyes. Jasmine folded the letter with care, set it beside her folder, and looked straight ahead. Not at Greene, not at the chair, but toward the people she actually answered to. I may be wearing lashes. I may speak with passion, but I came here to legislate. And if a child in Arkansas believes she belongs in the room because she saw me, then that's the only credential I need today. The chair didn't interrupt. The cameras didn't cut away, because in that moment the room understood. The real topic of the hearing wasn't funding. It was value. And Jasmine Crockett had just placed the full cost of dignity on the table without raising her voice. The letter sat there, folded neatly like a line that couldn't be crossed. The room had felt it, that stillness after Jasmine read Amara's words. A stillness not born of politeness, but of realization. And for a brief second, it seemed Marjorie might let it pass, might sit with discomfort, might allow the moment to breathe. But that's not who she was. She wasn't built for silence. She was built for spectacle. Marjorie adjusted the cuff of her red blazer, a movement too slow to be accidental. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then she turned her mic back on. A letter from a child, she said, her voice sugary with venom. Touching. But this isn't a book club, Congresswoman. It's the United States House of Representatives. A few chuckles echoed from her side of the aisle. We're here to discuss law enforcement budgets, not bedtime stories. Jasmine didn't flinch. But Marjorie wasn't done. She leaned in, voice rising just enough to stain the moment. See, this is what the left does. They hide behind feelings and poetry. They bring in emotion when we're supposed to bring in policy. Meanwhile, real Americans, the ones who work, who pay taxes, who don't see race in everything, they're tired of being lectured by leftist influencers and eyeliner. The word eyeliner hung in the air like a sneer. She pressed further. You want to talk credentials? Okay, tell me what legislative victory came from that letter. Because what I see, what America sees, is a well-rehearsed performance. You're not here to legislate. You're here to trend. You're not a policymaker. You're a mascot. The word hit again, harder this time. Mascot. As if Jasmine's entire presence was ornamental. As if her voice only mattered as long as it stayed quiet and photogenic. A few aides looked down at their notes. The chair didn't interrupt. And then came the line. The one that peeled back every layer of decorum. Let's be real, Marjorie said, voice flattening into something colder. You're just the latest accessory for the Democratic Party. A decorative cardboard cutout, pretty packaging for radical nonsense. You weren't sent here to lead. You were sent here to look good while someone else pulls the strings. Gasps now, low and scattered, but real. Jasmine turned slightly, her eyes calm. Not blank, but calculating. Still no response. But Marjorie misread the silence as weakness. She leaned in even harder. You remind me of those social media activists. All lashes, no legislation, big speeches, big hair, but nothing to show for it. A bootstraps fairy tale wrapped in hashtags. There it was. Bootstraps. The coded word that always came next. The dog whistle of American exceptionalism aimed at black ambition. She smiled wider now, feeling the power return to her. You talk about kids writing letters like that's leadership, but leadership means budgets, votes, deals, strategy, not sob stories, not speeches about being too much. Maybe if you stop performing, you get something real passed. Silence, except it wasn't empty anymore. Across the chamber, one young staffer, a Latina intern, no older than 20, swallowed hard and adjusted her ID badge like a shield. A black journalist in the media row narrowed her eyes and began typing furiously, capturing every word. And Jasmine? She simply crossed her hands in front of her. No reply, no escalation, because she wasn't going to trade dignity for drama. But Marjorie wanted that trade. She needed it. because nothing terrified her more than being ignored by someone she tried to humiliate. So she fired the final insult. "You're not the voice of the people, Congresswoman. You're a product. A repackaged, Instagram-ready version of everything wrong with identity politics. You're not shaking the system. You're cheapening it." And for a moment, even she knew she'd gone too far, but her pride wouldn't let her stop. Not when Jasmine still hadn't responded. Not when every camera in the room was watching. Marjorie smirked and tossed her closing dagger like it was an offhand joke. "Honestly, you're not even disruptive. You're just loud." It was meant to be the last word. But the room, it didn't shift in her favor. It recoiled. Not because Jasmine had spoken, but because she hadn't. Because silence, in the right hands, doesn't mean absence. It means preparation. And Marjorie, for all her fire and fury, had no idea. She'd just poured gasoline in a room built of dry truth. And Jasmine, she was already striking the match. There's a kind of silence that's soft, passive, forgettable. This wasn't that. This was the kind of silence that comes before a verdict. Jasmine Crockett sat still, not in shock, not in defeat, but in something else. A stillness so intentional it almost felt like a threat. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't even reach for her mic. And yet, the temperature in the chamber had changed. The air grew heavier, like the atmosphere just before a storm breaks open. Because what Marjorie Taylor Greene, and others like her, never understood was that black women don't always yell to be heard. Sometimes they just wait. Jasmine's eyes scanned the room like someone studying a crime scene in real time. Not the crime of insult, but the deeper one. The normalization of erasure. Because Marjorie's attack wasn't new. It was tired. Mascot. Accessory. Too emotional. Too loud. Not strategic enough. They were all just rebranded versions of the same lie. You don't belong here unless we say you do. But Jasmine? She wasn't new to that lie. She had heard it in courtrooms in East Texas. She had heard it during campaign debates in rural counties that didn't expect a black woman to show up, much less win. She had heard it in staff meetings, in donor calls, in coded language from journalists asking, "But do you think your tone helps your cause?" And every time she had done the same thing. She had listened, measured, waited, not out of fear, out of control. Because silence, when weaponized with intention, isn't weakness. It's alignment. It's clarity. It's the pause that reminds you the storm doesn't rush. It chooses when to strike. Jasmine lowered her hands from the desk to her lap, folded them carefully. Her fingers were still, but her mind was fire. She wasn't plotting revenge. She was remembering something. A hallway, a school. A phone screen lit up in the hands of a 13-year-old girl who thought too much was a defect. And that's when it clicked. This moment wasn't for Marjorie. It wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't even for the record. It was for Amara, for every child watching, for every black girl who'd ever been called a distraction in class, for every young woman whose questions were treated as defiance, for every future congresswoman who might one day sit at this table and wonder if silence was safer than truth. She didn't need to clap back. She needed to show them what restraint looked like in real time, what dignity felt like when wrapped around fire. Across the room, Marjorie was now tapping her pen on the desk, impatient, uncomfortable, because nothing unnerves a bully more than a target who doesn't flinch. The chair tried to continue the hearing. "Congresswoman Crockett, if you're ready to continue with your line of questioning regarding Section 4 of the proposed enforcement funding." Jasmine didn't answer right away. She breathed. She gathered herself not to calm down, but to center power. She picked up the letter again. Not to read it, just to hold it. A reminder that her power didn't come from clapping back. It came from being watched by someone who needed to see her not shrink. She adjusted her mic. Still no words. And yet, the entire room leaned in. Because this wasn't the silence of someone avoiding conflict. It was the silence of someone who knew. You're not ready for the truth I'm about to deliver. A staffer seated behind the dais quietly took out her phone again. Not to post, just to capture. Because in that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't need a slogan. She didn't need applause. She had what no insult could touch. Preparation, purpose, and presence in the storm. It was coming, not loud, not wild, but with the kind of calm that makes people remember. Not every earthquake shakes the ground. Some simply shift the room. It started with a breath. Not dramatic, not deep, just a quieted inhale, the kind you take when you know your silence has done its job. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, fingertips resting lightly on the folder in front of her. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. "Mr. Chairman," she said calmly, her tone crisp as paper, "I'll proceed now." And just like that, the temperature shifted. The audience, reporters, aides, opposing members, they weren't just listening, they were waiting. Because this wasn't going to be a rebuttal. This was going to be a reckoning. Jasmine slid one document to the front of her folder. A printed federal report, 142 pages long, marked with yellow tabs. She tapped her mic once. "Before I ask my first question, I'd like to enter into the record House Bill 118, a bill I co-authored last year focused on community-based alternatives to youth incarceration. It passed with bipartisan support. 4 Republicans voted yes." She looked directly at Marjorie. No smile, no shade, just fact. "That's one more legislative victory than a tweet ever got me." A quiet shuffle rippled through the room. She continued, "Now, I was accused of being a mascot, a decorative prop, a performer. So I just want to ask a few clarifying questions." Her tone remained measured, but her words began to tighten like a net. "To the chair, can you confirm how many bills Marjorie Taylor Greene has had passed into law this session?" The chair glanced at a staffer, uncomfortable. The number was public. "0, he replied quietly. Jasmine nodded, unfazed. "Thank you. And how many bipartisan amendments has she introduced in the last 2 years?" Another pause. "Also 0. Jasmine leaned back slightly. A controlled exhale. Then leaned forward again, sharper now. "And while we're on the topic of credentials, can someone remind me which House member was on the floor until 3 a.m. last July fighting for federal protection of maternal health funding for Black rural counties?" She paused, then answered her own question. "Oh, right, that was me." No applause, just tension, pure electrified tension. She flipped the page. "We talk about law enforcement budgets, but what about the funding gaps for trauma response teams in communities that get over-policed and underprotected?" "The data's here, in this report." She lifted it, set it down. "Page 87, you're welcome to read it, unless decorative props aren't supposed to read federal analysis." Now the silence wasn't just thick. It was shifting against Marjorie. You could feel it. Jasmine picked up the letter from Amara once more, slowly, intentionally. "I was also told that reading a letter from a child wasn't legislating. But I'd argue, if a 13-year-old in Arkansas knows more about the real-world impact of dignity than some of my colleagues, maybe she deserves a seat here more than they do." The words hit like steel wrapped in velvet. No yelling, just truth. Undeniable. Undiluted. And Jasmine wasn't done. She looked across the chamber. Not at Marjorie now, but at the staffers, the young ones, the interns, the aides trying not to nod too visibly. "Here's the real question. What does it say about this chamber, that a Black woman with past legislation, bipartisan support, and lived experience is still asked to prove she belongs, while others can fail upward as long as they make noise on cable news?" There it was, the moment. Marjorie shifted in her seat. Her smugness cracked, just slightly. Her pen, once tapping, had stopped. Jasmine locked eyes with the committee. "I didn't come here to trend. I came here because the people who elected me don't care if I wear lashes. They care if I bring results, and I do." A pause. Sharp, surgical. "So no, I won't apologize for reading a child's letter, because maybe the problem isn't that I brought her voice into this room. Maybe the problem is that too many of you forgot who this room is supposed to serve." That was the reversal, not an outburst, not a speech, a mirror. And suddenly, the roles were clear. Jasmine wasn't the one performing. She was prosecuting. And the chamber, for the first time all morning, it listened. The room wasn't the same anymore. Something had shifted, not in noise but in gravity. The kind of shift you feel when power realizes it's not holding the mic anymore. Marjorie Taylor Greene sat stiffly in her chair, arms crossed tighter than before, her mouth pursed like a question she no longer knew how to answer. Because she hadn't expected Jasmine Crockett to respond like that. No rage, no rant, just facts that cut deeper than any insult she could conjure. And worse, the room hadn't sided with her. Not this time. The chair tried to move things along. Thank you, Congresswoman Crockett. We'll now move to... But Marjorie wasn't done. She turned her mic back on with a click, loud enough to sound like defiance. You know what's funny? She said, her voice sharper now, almost trembling with control she was trying hard to keep. Every time someone like her gets called out, it becomes a racial moment, a viral pity party. Suddenly, truth is an attack, and accountability is coded language. Jasmine didn't look up. She'd already said what needed to be said. She was finished, but Marjorie wasn't talking to her anymore. She was performing for survival. I've been in this chamber long enough to know when someone's using identity as armor. And let's be real, the left has mastered it. Turn every critique into a trauma narrative, every debate into a discrimination claim. It's exhausting. Gasps. Not many, but enough. The crack had started. The former chairwoman of the committee, a white woman in a blue suit, shifted uncomfortably. She looked like she wanted to speak, but something in her face said, "Don't make it worse," Marjorie pressed on. She talks about bipartisan bills like that, erases the fact she's part of the most radical wing of Congress. Her whole career is hashtags and headlines. She's not representing her district. She's representing a movement that wants to divide this country. Then the word. That word that always comes when they start to lose the argument and reach for the oldest play in the American book. Look, I don't care how many letters she reads or how many times she cries on cue. This isn't about feelings. This is about whether we're letting hood politics into the halls of Congress. Silence, and not the kind that respects, the kind that recoils. Even the chair blinked. The stenographer's fingers paused, then resumed, like she wasn't sure if she heard it right. But Marjorie kept going. Because you can dress it up, put it in a power suit, teach it to quote policy, but it's still the same street-level grievance politics that ruins cities. No one laughed. No one smirked. A few aides stood up, not loudly, just quietly, gathering their notes and walking out. One black staffer in the back wiped her eye with the cuff of her blazer and didn't come back. And Jasmine still didn't speak, didn't move. Her silence wasn't a defense anymore. It was indictment, because Marjorie had done exactly what Jasmine didn't need to do. She exposed herself. The crack wasn't just visible now. It was echoing. One student observer, seated in the press row, whispered into her phone as she streamed, "Did she just say hood politics on a live congressional record?" Someone replied in the TikTok comments, "She's not talking about policy, she's talking about blackness." And then, almost like a reflex, the final act of desperation, Marjorie reached for the oldest, most tired defense. "I marched with black pastors during COVID. I've supported prison reform. My housekeeper is Latina, and we get along great." A noise rippled through the room. Not a laugh, but something darker. Resignation. Embarrassment. And then the final crack split wide open. "What do you people want?" Marjorie snapped, voice now losing all composure. "A free pass because of your skin? Because you got sad letters from kids? I grew up working class too. Nobody gave me a letter. I didn't need a letter. I got up and worked." There it was. Bootstraps, you people, free pass. All the dog whistles, all the old tools, tossed on the table like broken weapons. The chair finally intervened. "Congresswoman Greene, I'm going to ask you to refrain from further personal commentary and return to the issue at hand." But it was too late. The moment was already clipped, already shared, already looping on phones in offices and lunchrooms and group chats nationwide. And Jasmine? She slowly reached forward, pressed the mic button, tapped it once, not to speak, just to remind them she was still here, still watching, still holding the line, not with volume, but with proof, because Marjorie had tried to paint her as a caricature and ended up exposing her own. The soundbite hit the internet before the hearing even adjourned. You can dress it up, put it in a power suit, teach it to quote policy, but it's still the same street-level grievance politics that ruins cities. 12 seconds, clipped, shared, unforgiving. No edits needed, no dramatic music, just truth. Raw, ugly, and caught in 4K. Within an hour, it had more than 1.5 million views on TikTok. Had hood politics trended on X, but not the way Marjorie might have hoped. At first, the reactions were split. On one side, pundits and conservative influencers claiming Marjorie was just telling it like it is, that she was calling out race baiting and identity theatrics. Fox News ran a chyron by sunset, Greene under fire for calling out race politics in Congress. But on the other side, something deeper was stirring. It wasn't just outrage, it was recognition. Black lawyers, organizers, teachers, even middle school students started stitching the clip with their own experiences. One young public defender in Baltimore posted a response. This is exactly what we face in courtrooms every day. Decorated until we speak, respected until we challenge, silenced the moment we stop smiling. Another reply came from a white woman, a former Hill staffer. I used to work in this chamber. I saw the eye rolls, the coded smirks. Marjorie didn't slip. She said the quiet part on purpose. The shift wasn't loud at first. It came in waves. Faculty from Howard, Spelman, and UCLA Law issued a joint statement calling the remarks a textbook case of performative decorum masking institutional bias. A group of Black congressional staffers organized an emergency after-hours gathering, titled Surviving Respectability, Politics in Power Spaces. A viral Reddit thread began circulating. When they say hood rat with a suit on, but call it decorum. But the real pivot came when people outside the political sphere took notice. A 10th grade teacher in Ohio printed Jasmine's quote from earlier. If a child in Arkansas believes she belongs in the room because she saw me, then that's the only credential I need today. She taped it to her classroom door. By the end of the week, over 200 classrooms across the country had done the same. On MSNBC, a panel of analysts debated whether Greene had crossed a line. But one guest, a Black historian from Princeton, shut the conversation down with one sentence. You don't accidentally call someone a prop. You don't accidentally say hood politics. That wasn't a gaffe. That was heritage dressed in a blazer. Even inside the Capitol, things started to fracture. A Republican congressman, white, mid-40s, suburban Georgia, distanced himself on record. I may not agree with Congresswoman Crockett on policy, but what was said today was beneath the dignity of this chamber. Others stayed quiet, but silence in this case sounded like guilt. Then came the most unexpected development. A group of Harvard Law alumni, including 3 judges and several high-profile attorneys, signed an open letter supporting Jasmine Crockett's conduct in condemning Marjorie's language as unethical and institutionally corrosive. They ended it with, when a woman brings policy and is met with personality attacks, we must ask, what are we protecting, power or a performance of it? And still Jasmine, silent, no tweet, no press release, no victory lap. Her last words still echoed. If a child believes she belongs in the room because she saw me, that was enough. Because the people had picked it up now. TikTok creators began overlaying her voice on videos of girls getting ready for debate tournaments. Mothers posted clips of their daughters watching Jasmine speak and whispering, she looks like me. And not a prop. Voice without permission. At girls who don't shrink. They trended. Not because of marketing, because of meaning. The narrative wasn't being managed anymore. It was being reclaimed. And Marjorie? Still defiant, still ranting, still pushing appearances on fringe networks, complaining about woke mobs and social media warfare. But this time, no one was amplifying her echo because the country had seen enough. And in that silence, the one she had mocked just hours earlier, something irreversible had happened. The shift. Jasmine Crockett hadn't raised her voice. She had raised a generation. The room had fallen still again, but this silence felt different. Not tense, not awkward, reverent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Jasmine Crockett hadn't spoken in minutes. She hadn't needed to. Marjorie had said too much, and the country had already heard. But Jasmine knew something most of them hadn't learned yet. Moments like this don't come often. When the noise quiets just long enough for truth to enter, you walk through the door. She reached for her mic. No rush, just purpose. And as she spoke, there was no performance in her voice. Only precision. A lot's been said today. Some of it loud, some of it tired, and some of it meant to shrink me. She didn't look at Marjorie. She didn't have to. But I didn't come here to fit your image of who belongs in this seat. I didn't come here to meet a quota or to play a role. Then came the pause. Intentional, clean, unapologetic. I don't speak to impress panels. I speak so girls in dorms like mine used to be. Finally get a mirror. The words landed like a verdict. Not shouted, not dramatized, just delivered. Like fact. In the press gallery, a reporter stopped typing mid-sentence. A C-SPAN cameraman whispered to a colleague, "Did she just say that?" And across the country, phones lit up. On TikTok, on Threads, on Reddit, on YouTube Shorts, on Instagram Reels. That 20-second clip was everywhere by nightfall. No transitions, no edits. Just her. At a desk, hand on the mic, truth on her lips. I speak so girls in dorms like mine used to be. Finally get a mirror. It didn't feel like politics. It felt like recognition. A Latina law student in Los Angeles stitched the video with the caption, "They told me to straighten my hair, soften my voice, wear lighter tones." I watched on this clip and realized I've been shrinking for rooms I was born to own. A trans college sophomore in Atlanta whispered into camera, "They told me I was too much. Too loud, too sensitive." She didn't lower her voice. She raised mine. The phrase, "get a mirror," became more than a quote. It became a signal. In Houston, a teacher printed the quote and posted it outside her classroom. By morning, students had written sticky notes around it that read, "I'm not too loud." I ask questions, and that's not a problem. I'm finally seen. In Philadelphia, a high school senior added the quote to her college admissions essay. Her counselor read it and cried. In a barbershop in Oakland, the clip played on loop for 30 minutes. No one muted it. In a church basement in Chicago, a group of teenage girls watched the speech during a youth leadership workshop. One of them said softly, "That's me. That's the me I never saw before." Even major news outlets, the ones that had ignored Jasmine in earlier cycles, picked it up. CNN aired the clip. So did MSNBC. Fox tried to mock it, but only made it trend harder. And still, Jasmine didn't comment, didn't retweet, didn't repost, didn't chase the echo because she didn't need to. The mic had done its job, not dropped, passed. The microphone had long gone cold, but what it carried, still burning. Jasmine Crockett didn't tweet, didn't hold a press conference, didn't call for anyone to resign. She simply went back to work. But the country didn't move on, because when a single sentence breaks a ceiling, it doesn't just echo, it builds. I speak so girls in dorms like mine used to be. Finally get a mirror. The quote had gone viral, yes, but what came next wasn't a trend. It was a shift in consciousness. In Congress, a new resolution was introduced within 2 weeks. The Crockett Principle. Drafted by a coalition of freshman representatives of color, it aimed to require racial bias review in House hearings, ban coded language in official transcripts, mandate civility training focused on historical context, not just etiquette. It was met with resistance, as expected. But what no one expected? The public support. A petition backing the resolution gathered over 1.2 million signatures in 5 days. Not from lobbyists, from teachers, students, nurses, people who had heard her words and said, "Me too." In schools, something else began. A network of educators from Atlanta to Minneapolis built lesson plans titled Mirror Moments, Representation, Power, and Belonging. They used Jasmine's clip to teach the power of rhetoric without rage, the difference between performance and purpose, how voice, when rooted in dignity, transcends decorum. One seventh-grade teacher in Baltimore wrote, "I've taught MLK speeches. I've taught Obama's 2008 campaign, but my black girls have never sat this still for a clip until Jasmine." In law schools, a new case study emerged. At Columbia, at UCLA, at Southern University, even at Harvard, professors began assigning the full transcript of the hearing as part of their legal advocacy and public ethics curriculum. The discussion prompt was simple. Whose voice was appropriate? Whose voice was authentic? And what does it cost to be both? One student wrote, "It was the first time I saw someone win without raising their voice and without lowering their worth." In the streets, the art began. Murals in Brooklyn, spoken word sets in New Orleans, pop-up poetry walls in Oakland, all built around 7 words: finally get a mirror. One muralist, a black trans man in D.C., painted Jasmine in navy blue with streaks of gold behind her, mic in one hand, letter in the other. Below it, he wrote, "She spoke like thunder, but never raised her voice." Even in corporate America, the quote crept in. A Fortune 500 CEO referenced it in a boardroom. A black woman partner at a major law firm quoted it on LinkedIn, saying, "This week, I didn't need to justify my presence in another pitch meeting. Jasmine already did it for me." And yet, not everyone clapped. Tucker Carlson ran a full segment mocking her. The TikTok congresswoman thinks her job is to inspire sad girls in dorms. We used to make laws. Now we make slogans. It aired, it trended, but this time it didn't stick because people remembered something. Jasmine had already made laws. They just didn't want to admit a black woman could do both. And then quietly an email reached her office. Subject line, "Amara saw your clip." Body, "She cried when she heard you read her words. Then she asked to buy a blazer, navy blue. She wants to be Congresswoman Amara for Career Day." Amara's mom. Jasmine didn't respond with a quote. She didn't repost the message. She just printed it, folded it, and placed it right next to the first letter, the one that started it all. Because sometimes the loudest impact doesn't come from what you say. It comes from who remembers they can speak, because you did. They invited her to shrink, to stay quiet, and to sit still, to wear the title but never speak like she earned it. They labeled her a prop, a mascot, a distraction in lashes. But Jasmine Crockett, she didn't raise her voice. She raised a mirror. She didn't clap back with anger. She answered with truth. She didn't grandstand. She testified. And that letter from a 13-year-old girl in Arkansas who had been told she asked too many questions, it became the one answer no insult could compete with. Because when Jasmine spoke those words, "I speak so girls in dorms like mine finally get a mirror," she didn't just reclaim the mic. She rewrote who it belonged to. This story wasn't about a hearing or a hashtag or a clapback. It was about the cost of dignity and the power of showing up anyway. It reminded us, power doesn't always look like noise. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it sounds like a whisper the world can't unhear. And sometimes it comes from the quietest girl in the loudest room who dares to say, "I belong here." Not because she was allowed in, but because she showed the door was never locked in the first place. This story is a dramatized and fictionalized account meant to reflect real struggles in modern America. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. Now, before you go, take a breath. And if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Tap like to help stories like this reach those who need to hear them. Subscribe if you want more narratives that challenge power without chasing spectacle. Leave a comment below. Tell us which moment hit hardest for you, and share this with someone who still believes the quietest people often carry the deepest truths. Because maybe the next Jasmine Crockett isn't in office yet. Maybe she's just waiting for a sign that her voice matters. Maybe She's watching now, and if she is, we hear you, we see you, and we're not looking away.